Hello everyone, my name is Marshall Swarney, and this is my presentation on VORs, CDIs, and HSIs. I wanted to do this topic because I think we are a bit spoiled with our GPSs. However, like anything else in the aircraft, the GPS system can always fail, and we'd have to resort to VOR usage. I'm going to be going over kind of how to interact the CDI and HSI with the VOR, and how to do VOR checks, as well as the errors that can come from VOR systems. Very quickly, I'll just recover what Mr. Nolly has covered for us, that the VOR transmits in 360 directions, which we call radials, and the VOR itself will transmit on two frequencies, and that is how the VOR receiver is able to figure out where it is in relation to the VOR. This is the VOR antenna. It's usually on the tail of the aircraft, and it looks like a V most of the time. Helps me remember VOR. These are the main instruments that we use for VOR navigation. In the top left, there is a RMI, and the purpose of this instrument is to point in the direction of the VOR in reference to the heading of the aircraft. We don't see these very much anymore. However, they are often in PFD systems. In the bottom left, we have the CDI. We should all be pretty familiar with that. And the two on the right are both HSI, one being on a PFD and the other one being just a regular 6-pack. Important to know that the CDI does not know your heading. The HSI does know your heading as long as you're pointing the actual arrow in the correct direction. But the HSI can reference your heading, but the CDI has no reference to your heading. These are kind of my rules of thumb. One, don't overcomplicate it. A lot of people try to think about this stuff too much, I think, but it's relatively simple. Number two is to always have the CDI on the desired direction of flight. Here's an example of what I mean by always have the CDI on the direction of flight that you desire. Here in the top left, you can see the plane is right over the VOR, and I have the CDI set on 090, and if we just take flight in the direction, we will stay centered on the 090 radial. Number three is to center the needle for a to indication, twist the needle towards or to the needle. Here you can see that the needle is not centered, and so if I just twist towards the needle, I center it up and I have a to indication. To center the needle for a from indication, twist the needle away or from the needle. Okay, here you see I have a to indication with the offset needle to the right, so I'm going to spin from it to the left to take us to a from indication and center it up. Now, for us to use the VOR equipment in the airplane for IFR usage, which most of our commercial operations and airlines or cargo or even corporate will be under IFR operations, and we have to check it the preceding 30 days before using it. We have four main ways to check the VOR, and they all have their own tolerances. The VOR testing facility, dual VOR check, and ground check all have a error tolerance of plus or minus 4 degrees. The air check has an error tolerance of plus or minus 6 degrees. First, we'll start with the VOR testing facility, also known as a VOT, and we'll have to hop onto the chart supplemental. And if we look here in Colorado, we can see that we can do one in Colorado Springs or Centennial or DIA. Let's choose Colorado Springs, and so we have to fly down there and then tune into 110.4. Okay, assuming we have the frequency tuned in and we are in Colorado Springs, we should twist the OBS knob straight north and get a from indication. It should center within 4 degrees. Looks like it's off by maybe a degree. We double check that by going south, and we should get a centered to indication. I like to remember that North should get a from indication and south should get a to indication by thinking of a Cessna 182. Okay, next going to the dual VOR check. We're going to assume that this airplane has both a HSI and a CDI. And so we're going to center them both up momentarily. And that centers up at about 178 with a 2 indication. And now if we go on to here, we already have a 2 indication, and so we want to spin towards the needle. And to center it up, it looks about 181 degrees perhaps. And so that is 3 degrees of error, but that's within our standard 4 degrees of error. Next is a VOR ground check. Here we are back on the chart supplemental, and we see that under VOR receiver checkpoints, there's one in Durango. And it is on the radial 215, and we have to be in the run-up area for runway 3. Here's just a quick look at a taxi diagram, and we have to be in this run-up area down here. Okay, assuming we're in Durango and in the run-up area for runway 3, we want to center the dial with a from indication as we're referencing 215 radial. And the HSI centers up on 216. That's only 1 degree of error. That's within the tolerance. Lastly is the air check. So let's assume we use our GPS to get onto Victor Airway 244, and it comes off of Hayes at a 076 radial. And so, assuming we are already there, because we've used our GPS, and we thought, hey, let's go ahead and check our VOR system. And so now we're going to center the needle with the from indication as we're leaving the Hayes VOR in this example. And it looks like it centers up at about 076 exactly, so within tolerance. Okay, I'm going to go over the errors and why they're important in a timely and effective manner, hopefully. So let's say we're trying to be on the 270 radial, but our CDI is off by 6 degrees, so we are actually on the 276 radial. Our aircraft's DME from the VOR is 50. So we're obviously not going to be where we want to be, and we'll be off by a certain number of miles. The way you can figure out that distance is if you take the aircraft's DME multiplied by the sign of the error. In this case, we'll take the sine of 6 multiplied by 50, and we can see that we're off by about 5 1/4 miles. The reason that this is important is if we really are off by 5 1/4 miles, we are no longer inside the Victor Airway technically, as the Victor Airway goes only up to 4 miles out from the center. So this means that we may no longer be covered by our IFR altitude, such as the MEA. So when using VOR equipment that does have an error, it might be a smart idea to see the length of your longest changeover point to see how far off your route that might put you. On this airway, we can see that the overall length is 195 nautical miles, and half of 195 is about 98. So we'll multiply that by our sign of our error. And when we take that into consideration, we can be up to 10 degrees, or 10 miles off our course from where we actually want to be. The website I use the VOR simulation for is luismontero.com. Great website. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you.